I almost didn't open the glove compartment that afternoon. If I had just let it sit there, that little yellow envelope my daughter-in-law had tucked between the registration and the owner's manual, none of what came next would have happened. Or rather, all of it would have happened anyway, just as someone who didn't see it coming. But I did open it, and what I found inside changed the course of the next 2 years of my life in ways I still don't have the words to fully describe. Let me back up, because the glove compartment doesn't make sense without the 3 years that came before it. My name is Celeste. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years as a hospital administrator in Tucson, Arizona. My husband, Gerald. No, wait. I keep starting there with my husband, and that's actually part of the problem this story exposed. So let me start with me. I'm Celeste. I worked hard my whole life. My husband Dwight and I raised 2 kids in a modest ranch house on the east side of Tucson, drove used cars, took road trips instead of flights, and by the time we both retired, me from the hospital, him from the county assessor's office, we had a paid-off mortgage, reasonable savings. And what I genuinely believed was a close family. I believed that right up until the moment I didn't. My son Kyle is 38. He married a woman named Tara 8 years ago, and in the beginning I liked her just fine. She was sharp, funny in that quick-tongued way, and clearly organized. She could plan a birthday party or a move across town with equal efficiency. They had their daughter, my granddaughter Lily. No, I need a new name. They had my granddaughter Josie 2 years into the marriage, and for a while everything seemed to be moving in a reasonable direction. Then Kyle lost his job. It was a project management position at a construction firm, decent salary, good benefits. The company folded during a bad quarter, and Kyle found himself out of work at 35 with a wife, a 4-year-old, and a mortgage on a house they probably bought a little too big for their income. I understood. These things happen. The economy doesn't care about timing. Dwight and I talked it over the way we always talk things over, at the kitchen table after dinner with decaf coffee, and we agreed we'd help out for a few months, cover their utilities, help with groceries. Nothing that would strain us, just enough to keep them steady while Kyle got back on his feet. What I didn't plan for was that a few months would stretch into a year, and then 2, and then quietly, without any formal conversation or agreement, into just the way things were. By the time Josie started kindergarten, I had become the invisible infrastructure holding their household together. Their electric bill, automatically paid from my checking account, car insurance for both vehicles, mine. Carl's subscription to a job search platform, which I later discovered he stopped using after the first year. Tara's dental work when their insurance didn't cover it. The security deposit on a new apartment when they decided to downsize from the house. A new laptop for Kyle because he needed it for job applications, he said. Josie's dance classes because what grandmother says, no to that. I wasn't writing big checks all at once. That's how it sneaks up on you. It was $200 here, a $450 bill there. A mum, can you cover this just this one time? That turned into every time. Dwight kept a rough tally in a notebook he kept in his desk drawer. He showed it to me once, about 18 months in. The number surprised me. Not shocked me. I'd been writing the checks after all, but seeing it totaled up in his careful handwriting made something twist in my chest. We need to start tapering, he said, not angrily. Dwight rarely got angry. He got quiet and precise, which was sometimes harder to sit with than anger. I know, I said, but I didn't taper. I kept writing the checks and making the transfers because every time I tried to say something, Tara would mention how stressed Kyle was, or Kyle would call sounding defeated in a way that made me feel like pulling back would be the thing that finally broke him. And Josie would be in the background of those calls, chattering about something at school, and I would think, she doesn't need to feel this. The truth I wasn't ready to face was that my son had stopped looking for work in any serious way around the 14-month mark. Not stopped entirely. He'd take the occasional interview, mention a promising lead every few months. But Tara had also cut back her hours at the property management company where she worked, and I only found that out by accident when I called her office one afternoon, and the receptionist told me she was only in Tuesday through Thursday now. No one mentioned that to me. No one mentioned it because they didn't have to. I was paying the bills either way. The thing that finally made me say something wasn't money. It was a phone call from Josie. She was 6 at this point, calling from her mum's phone while Tara was in the other room. "Grandma," she said in that serious way small children have when they're repeating something they heard a grown-up say. "Daddy says we might have to move again if Grandma doesn't help with the thing." "What thing, sweetheart?" "I don't know. The number thing." I got off the phone with her and sat very still for a few minutes. Then I called Kyle. He and Tara had been approached, he explained, about an investment opportunity. A friend of a friend was doing something with real estate, short-term rentals, the kind that had exploded in markets like Scottsdale and Sedona. They wanted to buy into a small property together with 2 other couples. Their share would be $22,000. They'd need it within 60 days. $22,000. I'd been helping with utility bills and car insurance. This was a different category entirely. I told him I needed to think about it. The silence that followed that sentence, the pause before Kyle said, "Okay," was a silence I had never heard from my son before. Flat, almost clinical, like I'd given a wrong answer to a question with only one acceptable response. I talked to Dwight that night. He looked at the notebook. He looked at me. He said very quietly, "Celeste, we cannot do this." And I knew he was right. I also knew something else, something that was harder to name. My granddaughter had been used to deliver that message to me. A 6-year-old had been put on the phone, whether deliberately or carelessly, to plant the idea of the number thing in my mind. I wasn't sure which possibility bothered me more. I called Kyle back 2 days later and told him we wouldn't be contributing to the investment. What happened next was so swift and so coordinated that I didn't recognize it as coordination until much later. Within a week, the calls dropped off. Not completely. Kyle would still text occasionally, surface-level things, a photo of Josie, a one-line update. But the warmth evaporated. Tara stopped reaching out altogether. The standing Sunday afternoon calls we'd had for 2 years went from Tara picking up on the second ring to going to voicemail with a return text that said, "Crazy week, we'll call soon," which she never did. Dwight noticed before I said anything. "They're pulling Josie back," he said one evening. He'd been trying to set up a weekend visit, and it had been gently but consistently deferred for 3 weeks. "I know," I said. "They're using her. I know. That knowing didn't make it easier. It just made it lonelier. 6 weeks passed like that. Josie's birthday came and went with a brief FaceTime call that Tara ended after 12 minutes because Josie apparently had a play date. I sent gifts. I got a photo of Josie holding the stuffed animal I'd mailed her with a 2-word caption, "She loves it." Nothing from Kyle. Dwight started asking questions I didn't have answers to. What's the end of this? What do we do if they keep this up? What happens to Josie if we're just cut out? I didn't know. I just knew the silence felt like a negotiation, and I was being asked to name my price. Then, right about the time I was starting to wonder if things would ever go back to any version of normal, Kyle called. It was a Wednesday morning. I was at my kitchen table with coffee, and his name appeared on my phone like something I'd been waiting for without letting myself admit it. "Hey, Mum." His voice was warm again. Easy. Like those 6 weeks hadn't happened. "How are you and Dad doing?" "We're all right," I said carefully. "Good, good. Listen, Tara and I have been talking. We both feel like we've been really isolated lately, and part of that is on us. We've been stressed and we took it out on the wrong people." A pause. "We miss you guys. And Josie asks about Grandma Celeste constantly. She cried last week because she couldn't remember what perfume you wear. That detail almost undid me. I want to be honest about that. A grandmother is not immune to her granddaughter crying over the smell of her perfume. We were thinking, Carl continued, what if we did a little trip together? Get out of Tucson for a long weekend, all of us. Tara's cousin has a cabin outside Flagstaff, beautiful up there this time of year, right by the creek. We thought maybe you and Dad could drive up, we'd meet you there. Josie would lose her mind. Flagstaff. 2.5 hours north. Pines instead of desert. Cool air. My granddaughter losing her mind. That sounds really nice, I heard myself say. Great, there's just one thing. His voice shifted slightly, not much, just the fraction of a degree that you can only hear when you've known someone for 38 years. Our car's going to be packed pretty tight with all of Josie's stuff and the food we're bringing. Would you mind carrying a bag for us? Just a medium-sized duffel. Tara wants to bring some hiking gear and there's literally no room. Of course, I said. Of course. The duffel arrived at our front door the evening before the trip. Tara dropped it off herself, and she was, I noticed, almost aggressively pleasant. She hugged me for longer than usual, admired something about the entryway, asked if I'd changed the paint. When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her car back out of the driveway and felt, I want to say, cautiously hopeful. Dwight loaded the duffel into our SUV that night without looking inside it. We had no reason to look inside it. It was our son's bag. The drive the next morning started out feeling like the beginning of something repaired. The sky was that impossible early morning blue that Tucson does in October, and Dwight was in good spirits, running through the radio stations talking about stopping at a place he liked off the I-17. We'd been on the road for about an hour and 40 minutes when my phone buzzed. Kyle. I answered immediately, that reflex you develop as a parent that never fully goes away no matter how old your children get. Hey, Mum. Something was different in his voice, tight. Quick question. That duffel bag, you've got it, right? It made it into your car. Yes, it's in the back. Good, okay. I could hear him breathing. And you haven't, moved anything around in it, or opened it for any reason. The question hit me in a strange place. Not alarm, not yet. Just a wrongness that I couldn't immediately locate. No, I said. Kyle, why would I open your bag? No, of course not. Sorry. There's some stuff in there that's a little fragile, and I wanted to make sure it was secure before we got up into the hills. It's fine. It's been in the back since last night. Great. Okay. Another pause. And then, Mum, I love you. I want you to know that. I love you and I appreciate everything you've done for our family. My son said, I love you to me at the end of every phone call. What he did not do, had never done in 38 years, was say it in the middle of a conversation, unprompted, with that particular texture in his voice. The texture of a person who is concluding something. We said goodbye. I held the phone in my lap for a moment. Dwight glanced over. Everything okay? I don't know, I said. And then, before I'd even finished deciding, pull over. What? Dwight, I need you to pull over. Right now, please. He didn't argue. He signalled, found a wide shoulder where the highway opened up beside a stretch of scrubland and brought the car to a stop. A few other vehicles blew past us. What happened? He asked. The call was strange, I said. He asked if I'd open the bag. Why would he ask that? That's what I can't get past. Dwight turned and looked at the duffel in the back seat. It was a dark green canvas bag, mid-sized, with 2 outside pockets, perfectly ordinary. He looked at it for a long moment. Open it, he said. Dwight's Celeste. Open it. I climbed into the back seat. The zipper pulled easily. On top was some of Josie's things, a little zippered pouch I recognized as her art kit, a small stuffed rabbit I'd actually given her 2 Christmases ago, a folded sweatshirt with her school's logo on it. I moved them aside carefully. Beneath them were 4 packages, wrapped in brown packing tape, dense and rectangular, each one about the size of a thick paperback book. I am a 64-year-old woman who spent 3 decades managing a hospital. I have seen things, administered difficult situations, held my composure in rooms where composure mattered. But sitting in the back seat of my own car on the shoulder of the I-17, staring at those 4 packages tucked beneath my granddaughter's stuffed rabbit, I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the floor dropping out. I knew what I was looking at. Anyone would. I got back into the front seat. I didn't say anything at first. Dwight watched my face. "How bad?" he said. "Bad." He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them, checked his mirrors and said, "We're going home." We turned around. My phone started ringing when we were about 10 minutes back toward Tucson. Kyle, then Tara, then Kyle again. I turned the ringer off. Dwight drove and didn't say anything, and I was glad for that because there was nothing to say anything, and I was glad for that because there was nothing to say that would have helped. What I was doing in that silence was rearranging my entire understanding of the past 6 weeks. The freeze after I said no to the investment, the strategic thawing, the warm phone call, the duffel bag, Josie's things placed on top deliberately, so that if I had opened it I would see her rabbit and her art kit first, and the instinct to close it again without looking further would feel like privacy, like respect for my grandchild's belongings. They had used Josie's things as camouflage. That was the detail I kept returning to, not just as leverage, not just as emotional manipulation, but physically. Actually, her stuffed rabbit as a layer of concealment over something that could have sent me to federal prison. We pulled into their apartment complex 40 minutes later. Kyle's car was already there. They must have turned around when we did, or perhaps they'd never actually left. Perhaps there had never been a cousin's cabin. Perhaps Flagstaff was as invented as their reasons for the 6 weeks of silence. I still don't know. They were out of the car before we'd fully stopped. Kyle looked younger than he had in months. All the careful easiness of the phone calls had dropped away, and he just looked scared. Tara stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, jaw set. Dwight was out of the car first. He walked to the back, opened the hatch, and lifted out the duffel. He set it on the pavement between them and stepped back. Kyle looked at the bag, then at me, then at Dwight. "Mum," he started. "Don't," Dwight said. My husband, who rarely raised his voice, who had sat quietly at that kitchen table for 3 years watching me write checks, who had kept a notebook with a tally in careful handwriting. He said it once, calmly, and Kyle stopped. I walked over and stood next to Dwight. That mattered to me, even then. Standing next to him. "We found what's in the bag," I said, "and I need you to understand that I know exactly what you were planning to do. You were going to use your father and me to carry that across state lines. You used Josie's things to cover it up. And if we had been stopped, if anything had gone wrong, we would have been the ones held responsible." "We were desperate," Tara said. The word came out sharp, like she'd been holding it. "You don't know what it's been like. We owe people. Real people who don't just want a payment plan." "I know what desperation feels like," I said. "I was desperate every single time I said yes when I should have said no. I was desperate every time I worried about whether you'd make rent, whether Josie had enough, whether I was doing enough. I understand desperation, but I won't carry your desperation across state lines in the back of my car." Kyle tried several more things. He said it would have been just this once. He said they had no other option. He said I had never really understood how hard things were for them. He said the people they owed weren't patient and weren't safe, which I believed, and which did not move me the way he intended it to. Through all of it, Dwight stood beside me. He didn't say much, but he was there, and that was its own kind of answer. At some point, Josie's face appeared at the window of their car. She must have been in the back seat the whole time, waiting for the Flagstaff trip that was never happening. She pressed her nose against the glass and waved at me with one hand. I waved back. That was the hardest moment of the entire day, harder than opening the bag, harder than the conversation. I told Kyle that every form of financial assistance we provided would be ending immediately. The automatic bill payments, the transfers, the emergency fund I'd kept available for them, all of it, gone. I told him I'd already intended to have this conversation regardless of what happened today, which wasn't entirely true, but became true as I said it. I told him that if I ever found out, through any channel, that he was planning another attempt, I would contact the authorities without hesitation. Kyle told me I was destroying their family. I told him their family's stability had never actually been mine to maintain. We drove home. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and the saguaros looked exactly the same as they had 5 hours earlier when we'd driven north, past them full of something like hope, and that was somehow the strangest part. The landscape not caring at all. That night, Dwight and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He took out the notebook. He looked at the tally. Then he closed it and put it in the drawer, and I don't know if he ever looked at it again after that. We called our bank the next morning and removed Kyle and Tara's access to everything they had access to. Our estate attorney was on the phone by Thursday. I sent one text to Kyle that said only, "I hope you find a way through this that doesn't involve hurting anyone else." He did not respond. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman who introduced herself as a family friend of Tara's, someone I'd met once at a barbecue 2 or 3 years ago, whose name I didn't remember and whose voice I barely recognized. She told me that Kyle and Tara had been arrested 2 nights earlier attempting to transport controlled substances across state lines. She told me that Josie had been with a neighbor at the time of the arrest and was now with a CPS worker pending emergency placement. I was in my car to the CPS office within an hour. The paperwork for emergency grandparent custody is not simple and is not fast, but our attorney had prepared us for this possibility. Not this exact scenario, but some version of it, and by that evening Josie was in our guest room with her school backpack and her stuffed rabbit, the one that had been in the duffel bag, which I had quietly retrieved and washed and placed on her pillow before she arrived. She asked me that first night if she was in trouble. No, I told her. "You are not in any trouble at all." "Are Mummy and Daddy in trouble? There is no good script for this. I've thought about it many times since. The answer I gave, whether it was right. They made some choices that have consequences," I said, "but you are safe. And Grandpa and I are going to take very good care of you." She thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "Can I have rabbit?" I handed her the rabbit. She held it against her chest and closed her eyes, and within about 4 minutes she was asleep, because she was 6 years old and her body was wiser than the situation. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Kyle and Tara were convicted on federal charges and are currently serving sentences at separate facilities. Their attorneys negotiated the terms. I did not attend any of the proceedings on the advice of our lawyer, who felt my presence would complicate things. I sent one letter to Kyle after sentencing. I told him I didn't hate him. I told him that was important to me, that he know. I told him Josie was safe, was in school, was doing well. I told him I would send updates, but that I needed time before I could receive responses. He wrote back 6 weeks later. It was 4 pages, handwritten. I read them. I folded them carefully and put them in an envelope in my desk drawer. I haven't decided yet what to do with them. What I can tell you from where I'm standing now, 18 months into raising my granddaughter at 64, which I did not expect to be doing and which has rearranged my retirement into something I don't fully recognize. Though I'm not sure recognize is what I'm looking for anymore. Is this? Josie is in 2nd grade. She has a best friend named Harper. She has opinions about her sandwiches that she will express at volume. She has started asking Dwight to teach her chess, which he is doing with the kind of seriousness he brings to everything, and which she meets with the kind of impatience that is entirely appropriate for a 7-year-old learning chess. She had a nightmare 2 months ago and came and stood at our bedroom door and said, "Grandma?" And I was awake and across the room before she finished the word. There are mornings I'm tired in a way that is different from the tiredness of working. There are evenings when Dwight and I look at each other across the dinner table with Josie between us talking about something that happened at recess, and the look is not a simple one. It contains a lot of things. It contains the notebook in the drawer and the duffel bag on the shoulder of the highway and the 3 years of checks. And also it contains Josie, who is right there, who is fine, who is going to be fine. I don't talk about my son much. When people ask, neighbours, people from our church, former colleagues, I say it's complicated, which is the truest short version of the truth. It's complicated. He is my child. He also put 4 packages of something illegal under his daughter's stuffed rabbit and counted on my love for her as a delivery mechanism. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I've stopped trying to make them resolve into something simpler. What I know is this. The most damaging thing I did for years was confuse enabling with loving. I thought that as long as I was giving, I was helping. What I actually did was remove every incentive my son had to grow into the person he needed to become. When the support was infinite, the discomfort that should have pushed him toward change never came. And when I finally said no once to one request, he and his wife responded by trying to make me a criminal. That tells you something about what the help had built. It had not built gratitude. It had built entitlement with nowhere to go except further. I'm not telling this story because I've resolved it. I'm telling it because I drove north on a Tuesday morning with a bag in my back seat that I thought was packed with hiking gear and a future, and I drove home with something I hadn't seen in a long time, clarity about what I would and wouldn't do, about where my life actually belonged, about who was sitting in the back of whose car waiting for what trip going where. If you've been in any version of this situation, carrying bags that aren't yours, covering costs that shouldn't be yours, standing in for a safety net that someone should have been building themselves, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I couldn't. It's too complicated, and you know your people better than I know them. What I'll tell you is that the instinct that made me say pull over on that highway was not a dramatic one. It wasn't a thunderbolt. It was just a small, quiet, persistent voice that said, something is wrong here. And for the first time in 3 years, I listened to it. That voice was right. It usually is. Before you go, if any piece of this story found something in you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you've been here for a while, you know this community is full of people who've been through the hard versions of the things we all go through. Subscribe if you haven't. We're never too mature to start over. There's a version of this story where I never pull over, where I hear that strange edge in Kyle's voice, feel the wrongness of it, and talk myself out of it the same way I'd been talking myself out of things for 3 years, where I hand myself a reasonable explanation. He's anxious. He's been stressed. People say I love you at odd moments all the time. And I keep driving north until we reach a checkpoint I didn't know was there. I think about that version a lot, not with fear anymore, most either the kind of sober recognition of how close it was. How the same impulse that made me write check after check for 3 years, the need to smooth things over, to not make it harder than it already was, almost kept me in that car with 4 packages under my granddaughter's stuffed rabbit. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it now, is that the choices we make accumulate, not dramatically. Not all at once. They stack quietly, one reasonable seeming decision at a time, until the stack is so high you can't see over it anymore. I didn't become someone who could be used as a drug carrier overnight. I became that person in increments, each one justifiable on its own, each one a small erosion of the boundary between what was mine to carry and what wasn't. Carl didn't become someone capable of that plan overnight either. He got there the same way, incrementally, each time a consequence didn't arrive, each time the discomfort that should have pushed him toward a harder, better choice got cushioned by a transfer from my account. I thought I was protecting him. What I was actually doing was interrupting a process that, painful as it is the only way any of us actually learn to stand on our own. The cause was years of removed consequences. The effect was a green duffel bag on the shoulder of the I-17. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with. The idea that my love, expressed the way I expressed it, contributed to the outcome. But I think sitting with uncomfortable things is actually the work. The alternative is to stay comfortable and keep being surprised when reality doesn't match what we wanted to believe. What I know about Josie gives me something I didn't expect to feel through any of this: genuine hope, not the fragile, wishful kind I had on the drive north that Tuesday morning. Something steadier. She is being raised now in a house where the adults say what they mean, where the bills get paid because we planned for them, where no is a complete sentence that doesn't require 3 years of justification. She's learning without anyone lecturing her about it, that stability is built out of daily honesty rather than borrowed time. That's the thing I want her to carry into her life. Not a lesson about her parents, not bitterness, not fear, just the simple, durable knowledge that integrity is not a personality trait some people have and others don't. It's a practice. You choose it in small moments over and over until the choosing becomes the person you are. Dwight and I are not the same people we were before that Tuesday. We're quieter in some ways, more deliberate. We don't talk about Carl constantly, but we don't avoid it either. The notebook is still in the drawer. I haven't thrown it away. I'm not entirely sure why, except that it represents something true, and I've decided I'm done looking away from true things even when they're hard. I'm 64. I have time left, and I intend to use it well.